think it started. Hi friends, Mrs. Keller here. Sorry that I'm, uh, you know, lying down and my hair's not done and everything. Mrs. Keller's in kind of some pain right now with my neck and everything, so I can't really move my neck. And I actually told your parents that I was going to wait until tomorrow to post this, but just the thought of someone anticipating me posting a read aloud video and it not being there, that made me more sad than my neck hurts. So I want to read chapter 8, Jimmy Gets a Free Train Ride, to you tonight, and then I'll ask you chapter 8 comprehension questions, and then tomorrow the video I will post is going over all the comprehension questions for the week. So thank you for hanging in there with me. Chapter 8, Jimmy Gets a Free Train Ride. Just before the last bell rang on the last day of school, Mrs. Needham passed out our report cards. Worst first. It was a true relief that everything was back to normal. When Dolly Peach's name was called, he said, "I sure will enjoy not seeing you every weekday." The whole class went, "Ooh," and waited for Mrs. Needham to beat him into a bloody pulp. But she just called Benny Cobb. Right after the kindest, most loving friend in the world, Miss Clarice Ann Johnson, picked up her report card, my name was called last. Instead of holding it so the rest of the class could see, I folded it and walked back to my seat. Mrs. Needham leaned on the front of her desk. "Well, students, another year has come to an end. I hope all of you have a good summer. And let's all keep our fingers crossed for Mr. Joseph Louis Barrow, the brown bomber." Cheers came from everywhere. Mrs. Needham said, "It won't be long before he and that horrible German will be fighting. Normally, I am opposed to violence of any kind, but this fight is something special, and Joe needs all of our support. So let's remember him in any way we can." She timed her speech perfect. The bell rang, and even though everyone was wound tight as a spring, waiting to get into the summer, nobody moved. Mrs. Needham said, "Enjoy your vacation. Class dismissed." And students shot out of the room like lava out of a volcano. Me and Clarice helped her load her things into boxes and waved to her as we left. "See you in September." 3 blocks from school, in a vacant lot, there was a big circle of children screaming and laughing and punching their fists in the air. Every Friday after school, the hooligans get even with each other and meet to fight. Since this was the last Friday of the year, there was a lot of getting even to do. The fight circle was 2 times bigger than usual. Me and Clarice Ann Johnson hooked arms, leaned our heads into one another, and walked by. Right after we passed the crowd, Clarice stopped. "Deza, did you hear that?" I said, "Yes, I'm sure it's a swear word, but I'm just going to ignore those little hoodlums, and you should too." She shushed me. "Listen." The crowd was singing, "Pee-wee Jimmy Malone, same size as a chicken bone. Kill him all the way home." That's not a nice song. I dropped my books and ran back to the pack of yelling kids, pushing and clawing people aside until I got to the center. My heart broke in two. Jimmy was curled in a ball with splashes of blood all over his shirt, and that monster, Dolly Peaches, was standing over him with his fists balled up and a grin that would make any alligator or dinosaur proud. I heard a scream that didn't sound human and was so loud that I bet people in China, which is geologically exactly on the other side of the earth from Gary, would hear it. I slapped my hands over my ears and didn't know who was wailing until Clarice Ann Johnson said right in my ear, "Deza, stop screaming. Let's get Mrs. Needham." She yelled real loud, "Let's get Mrs. Needham and the police." That only got the crowd more excited. They bunched around us tighter and tighter. Me and Clarice were trapped in a wall, made out of evil and meanness. Dolly Peaches looked right at me. "If it ain't another circus act from the broke-butt poorhouse Malones. It's Pee-wee's show-off, crybaby, stink-mouth sister, number 2. He pointed at me. "Here's one of 'em Limpernstick's poems. You can run and tell that old cow Needham." He crunched his foot down on Jimmy's back. I heard that horrible scream again, and Clarice held my waist even tighter. Dolly Peaches sang, "Little Jimmy Malone asked his mommy for some hugs, 'cause he found out that his daddy ate some bugs. Jimmy never got taller, just got smaller and smaller, and now he has to sleep under someone's stinky rugs." When his foot went up again, I remembered what Father had told Jimmy when he was teaching him how to box. Twist your hips when you throw a punch. You have to shift all of your weight into it. And the only way to do it is to twist your hips. It's physics. It's just like hitting a baseball. If you use only your arms, you aren't going to hit the ball far. But if you put your hips into it, pow! You'll knock that baby clean out of the park. He showed us how to throw punches with our waists. Then, don't be a headhunter. Punching someone in the head is a good way to break your hand. Go for the belly. It'll get their attention just as surely as a pop to the head. Dolly brought his foot down on Jimmy again. I tore away from Clarice and shoved Dolly as hard as I could from behind. He stumbled and would have fallen if the circle of kids hadn't held him up. He turned to see who had the nerve enough to push him, and gave me one of his alligator smiles. Everyone let out a long, "Ooh." Clarice Ann Johnson threw her hands over her ears and looked shell-shocked. Dolly stepped over Jimmy and stood in my face. He pinched his nose between his thumb and finger to look like he was smelling a pile of garbage. "So, stink bug, you think just 'cause you're smart and a girl, I won't knock you out too? I ain't no gentleman. I'm gonna show you exactly how Joe Louis is gonna crush Max Smelling." Dolly took a step back and spit in each hand. "Deza, get ready to meet your midget brother. I got him to do a one-way ticket to the city of Kick Your Butt, USA, and I'm buying you one too." Dolly swung his right hand hard and caught me in the neck and the jaw. It felt like I swallowed a firecracker. Red light and white pain came out of the back of my back teeth on the left. I felt something loose in my mouth and thought I'd lost a tooth. But as my tongue turned it over in my cheek, I knew that it was one of the pieces of camphor-soaked cotton I keep in my back teeth to stop them from hurting. Because remember, she has cavities. He'd hit me his hardest, but he hadn't twisted his waist. He didn't even knock me down. The crowd roared. He raised his hands over his head, and I put my fists up like Father showed us. Dolly said, "Hey, Pee-wee, old number 2 can take a punch better than you." More laughs. "But if she don't go down with this one, you can call me Dolly Girl Peaches." He showed his teeth and reached his right hand back as far as he could, and he threw another arm punch. I heard, "Well, kiddo, here's our chance." I planted my feet. and threw all my weight into an uppercut aimed at Dolly's belly. He ran right into it. If his spine hadn't gotten in the way, my fist would have poked a hole clean through his back. He grabbed his stomach and dropped. First his knees, then the rest of him fell like a mighty oak. He rolled onto his back. Father also told us, press the advantage. One good punch doesn't mean the fight is over. A wounded animal is more dangerous than any other kind. My computer's stopping here. I apologize. There we go. I sat on Dolly's chest and grabbed his hair. Dolly Peaches, I'll stay here until you apologize for everything. I looked at Clarice. Keep track of how many times he has to apologize. I dug my fingers into Dolly's hair. First, you will apologize for hurting my brother. Then, you're going to apologize for all the talking about my father, who did actually eat some bugs, but did it for a very selfless and noble reason. Then for calling Mrs. Needham a cow. Then for mispronouncing my name on purpose. Then for that horrible poem, which wasn't anything close to being a limerick. Clarice held up 5 fingers. What about for calling you number 2? I said, that's too immature to even think about. 5 will do. Dolly's eyes were rimmed with tears, and his nose streamed a disgusting river. His mouth opened and shut, just like one of those out-of-luck, soon-to-be fried catfish Father used to bring home from the river. He tried to say something over the mocking laughs from the crowd. I raised my arm over my head. Hush! And they listened. The crowd turned into a pack of librarians, and the shh started at the front row and washed back. I leaned so close so I could hear Dolly Peaches. He half gasped. Sorry. 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 5 times. Then he whispered, oh, please get me an ambulance. Sweet baby Jesus, I'm dying here. Jimmy stood up. The blood of the Malones was pouring from a cut on his forehead. His face got tighter and tighter, and he looked just as angry as he'd been scared the second before. He looked right at me. Why, Deza? Why? He pushed his way through the crowd and disappeared. Clarice said, Deza, let's go. It looks like Dolly girl here has had enough. I love that girl. She dragged me through the crowd to go pick up my books. As soon as we were far enough away, she whispered, oh, Deza, did you see the look on Dolly's face? He is close to dying. We'll just have to go on the lam. I hear there's a place just outside of town where we can hop a freight train and be in California in 2 weeks. She looked around to make sure no one was listening. I have a cousin in San Diego who was tried for murder and got off. I'm sure he'll help us too. Clarice Ann Johnson, why would you be still for 1 minute? Would you be still for 1 minute, please? Sorry. Dolly isn't going to die. He's just like all the other bullies, a big nothing. Besides, I can't for the life of me understand how a boy would have the nerve to be a bully when he's forced to go through life with a name like Dolly Peaches. What on earth was his mother thinking? And Clarice, why have so many of your relatives been charged with murder? It's a good question. I was wondering the same thing. She ignored my question. Oh, Deza, you were so brave. You must have been terrified. Look, your hands are still shaking and you're crying. She grabbed my right hand, and I noticed how terribly it trembled. The real reason I was shaking dawned on me like a cold, lonely sun coming up on a frozen February Gary morning. This wasn't something new. This didn't have a thing to do with being scared. This was the same way I felt when I'd get to the end of a really good book. I was shaking now because I really like what just happened. I loved how I raised my arm like I was carrying a magical sword, and all the little thugs got quiet. They parted for me and Clarice like the Red Sea did for Moses, but most of all, I loved knowing that when something was happening to someone, I could do more than wring my hands. I could strike back. I loved those feelings at the same time I hated them. Fighting is wrong and unladylike, but worse than that, by gut-punching the biggest bully at Lincolnwood School, I had humiliated Jimmy, even though I'd stopped him from being hurt and maybe even get murdered. I now saw a very scary side of myself. Brain number 2 was starting to take over. All I could hope was that Jimmy would understand that I was trying to rescue him. All I could hope was that the crown of being the biggest bully wouldn't automatically come to me, because even though I really had enjoyed beating that million-toothed monster, that crown would rest uneasy on my head. We stopped at the library, then left too, worried and excited to sit still. I walked Clarice to her house. We did our motto. Then I ran to see if Jimmy had made it home. Jimmy was sitting on the couch with a pencil and piece of paper. He raised the paper to cover his face. This was something I wasn't going to put up with. Look, I'm sorry if I did anything wrong, but I just couldn't stand there and watch. Who knows what Dolly Peaches would have done to you? Besides, it was just a lucky punch. I bet you anything the next time I see him, he's going to pulverize me. Jimmy sounded very serious and rough. He'll have to go through me first. I covered my mouth, but a laugh slipped out anyway. Jimmy said from behind the paper, "Yeah, by the time he finishes pounding me into the ground, he'll be too tired to fight, and you can give him another ticket to Kick Your Butt USA." We both laughed. Jimmy had forgiven me. I pulled the paper away from his face. He had stuck a piece of tape on the place where Dolly Peaches had cut his forehead. "Here, let me see that." There was a 1-inch gash on his forehead that ran down into his left eyebrow. "Jimmy, you didn't cover the whole cut. It's not going to heal right. It'll leave a big scar." "Really?" Jimmy thinks scars make him a lot older and tougher. I went to the bathroom to get the tape, gauze, and the 500-year-old brownish-red bottle of mercurochrome. Guessing it's kind of like hydrogen peroxide. I gently pulled at one corner of the tape. He twisted his face. "Nah, sis, that's too slow. When you're about to do something that hurts, do it fast. Get it over with. Give it a good snatch." I said, "I'm going to count to 3, then pull it, okay? 1, 2. I closed my eyes and yanked the piece of tape before I got to 3. It held on way too long. There was so much eyebrow on the tape that it looked like a furry white and red caterpillar with a million skinny black legs sticking out of it. I hid it behind me and looked at my poor brother. The cut was zigging off into a new direction. Fresh blood was pooling up and trickling down his eye. "Well, Mr. James Edward Malone, you're always praying for horrible scars, and now you've got one. That's going to need stitches for sure." He forgot to deepen his voice and almost squeaked, "Nah, sis, just tape it up. I'll be fine." "This is going to sting. Should I bring a wash rag for you to bite on?" "That's only for white cowboys. I'm from Gary. I'm tougher than that." I dabbed a little of the mercurochrome into a piece of gauze and pressed it onto Jimmy's cut. He made a sound like a cat having his tail stepped on. I cut 10 skinny strips of tape and pulled both sides of the cut together. By the time I finished, Jimmy was breathing like he'd run a mile. The cut looked a lot better. He went into the bathroom to see what I'd done. A normal person would have been very mad at the new upside-down V that ran into their eyebrow and up on their forehead. He came grinning back. "Wow, this looks great, Deza. Thanks a million." He hugged me. "You're welcome." Which is probably not the right thing to say to someone who you just scarred for life. All right, that's our last chapter for this week. Let's see what the questions ask. Let's see here. Looks like we have 10 questions today. Question 1. What did Deza do with her report card when she walked back to her desk? Did she show it to everyone? Folded it so no one could see it? Screeched out loud with excitement? Or ripped it up in anger? Question 2. Who was fighting a few blocks from school? Deza and Clarice, Jimmy and Bobby, Deza and Dolly, or Jimmy and Dolly? Why did Deza punch Dolly? He was beating up Jimmy. He told Deza she was ugly. He threw a rock at Mrs. Needham, or he tore up Deza's report card. Question 4. If Deza hit Dolly, after Deza hit Dolly, she pulled his hair until he did what? Sang a song, told Deza she was the smartest girl in school, apologized 5 times, or play Ring Around the Rosie. Question 5. Why were Deza's hands shaking? She really liked what happened. She was afraid she was going to get in trouble. She was angry, or she thought Jimmy would be angry with her. Question 6. Where did Jimmy get hurt? In the nose, forehead / left eyebrow, arm, or leg? Question 7. Did Jimmy like his scar? Yes or no? Question 8. Why did Deza jump in to fight Dolly? It's an extended response question. We're kind of starting to forget, I noticed on quiz number 1 submission so far, to use our capitals, periods, complete thoughts, making sure our spelling's accurate, and that we are using evidence to support our answer. So why did Deza jump in to fight Dolly? Question 9. How do you think this made Jimmy feel? Same thing, extended response. Question 10. What do we know about Deza's character from this chapter? Ooh, we've been talking about character traits, character motivations this week. So, what can you tell me in an extended response what we know about Deza's character from this chapter? Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being patient while I stumble, while I attempt to read with a crooked neck. And I appreciate you tuning in, even though I told your parents that there wouldn't be a video tonight. I just felt too bad about not posting one. So I will see you tomorrow, Zoom meeting, 11 a.m. I'll send that link out again for those of you that don't have it, and have a great night.